glad to have you all here and joining us. I'm your host, Noah Schaefer. I'm going to be kind of emceeing and introducing folks today. Might do a magic trick or two later. And so today we're going to be hearing from a bunch of different folks who are real kind of experts in the field, people who have real experience to share and perspectives and all of that. I'll highlight, if you saw an earlier version of the schedule, we've switched the times between Eric and Diana due to availability. And so we'll be starting with Diana shortly. I've also added a little extra time for this introduction I'm doing now. But this is the overall picture of the schedule. I'll probably show this once or twice to give you a picture of things, but just to give you a sense of what's going on. I think you guys may have seen this in other places too. So that's the schedule today, right? We'll have breaks at kind of regular intervals throughout the day. Lunch break isn't tremendously long. You might see it's about 45 minutes for that. And by the way, I am planning on doing, definitely that's one of the breaks. I'm going to do a magic trick at the end of that. Just so you know, if you're planning your lunch, if you want to get back maybe 15 minutes early, then you'll get to see a magic trick then. So that's the schedule. Let's see, I should emphasize before I get any further that we have two boxes, right? There's the chat box and the Q&A box. So every speaker, we're planning to have some Q&A time. And so I would recommend using the Q&A box. I want to highlight in particular, this is a really useful feature. We used this last time. It was very effective. I want to emphasize that where's that coming from? Sorry. Oh, okay. So some of the folks who, one sec. I know some of you guys may be noticing some, here we are. Some of you may be noticing a little bit of noise, and that's because we had some of the panelists on making some noise. I've muted them, but the rest of you are attendees, so don't worry about accidentally making noise. You don't even have the ability to go off mute unless you come and join us as panelists. Where was I? Oh, so the Q&A box. I want to highlight a feature of the Q&A box. You won't see it now because there's no questions yet, but you'll start seeing it at the end of this next talk. Not only can you enter in questions, but you can upvote questions. And I want to highlight that because we're going to, we almost every speaker last time, we didn't have time to answer all the questions, and we prioritized the ones that get the most upvotes. So as we're going towards the end, I encourage you to take a look at the Q&A box and see if there are any questions that are the questions you already have. If not, then enter in the questions you have. And upload any questions that look interesting to you that you want to hear the answers to, because we will be using that Q&A box. I also want to emphasize we will not be using the chat for questions and answers. So please do not put questions in the chat box, right? That's not a way to get our attention. The chat box is more there for a little more like commentary and social interaction. I think that's a useful thing. We have it unlocked so you can all see the chat, but that is not for questions for the speakers. Also, if you want other people to see your chat, again, I'll mention the drop down there. By default, it only goes to the panelists, it only goes to those of us who are the speakers, right? It doesn't go to all attendees, so change that over to all panelists and attendees if you want everyone to hear you. All right, so that's some of that details and minutia. Without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker. This is Diana Criser. Diana has more than 20 years of experience designing products for the financial services industry. She has both the CUA and the CXA. Diana was recently appointed by Outlook Business Solutions to its new Accessibility Advisory Council for its digital accessibility testing service offering, Ally Support. So without further ado, if you'd like to greet in the chat box, you can say hello. And I will do this. Please greet Diana.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here today. And Noah, it doesn't look like my screen share is turned on.
Okay, and thanks for your patience, guys, as we work through any funny little details. I should have checked that. That's my fault. Let me see what I can do about.
No worries.
As the host, you think this would be easier. One second, let me see if this helps.
Take your time.
This is a thing that I've. So you don't see a screen share button at the bottom?
I do, but it tells me that it's disabled.
1 second. Oh, got it. Try now.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I got it.
All right.
Okay,
Take it away.
excellent. Okay, and would you confirm that you can see my screen?
Yep, I can see your screen.
Excellent. Thank you very much. No, I really appreciate that excellent introduction today. We'll be discussing designing for accessibility over the next 20 minutes or so. And before we get started, I just wanted to expand a little bit more on my collaboration with Outlook Business Solutions that Noah mentioned, because that's really the basis of my presentation today. So at the end of last year, they recruited me to represent usability as their very first member of their Accessibility Advisory Council for their ally support program. And Outlook Business Solutions creates earning opportunities for knowledge-based professionals who happen to be visually impaired. And then their Ally Support Program is a subscription-based accessibility testing and support program that they offer. So without further ado, we'll get started with a brief overview of the WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These have been created by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C. They're an international community that develops open standards to ensure the long-term growth of the web. And their Web Accessibility Initiative, or WAI, those are the strategies, standards, and resources to make the web accessible to people with disabilities. The WCAG is made up of principles, and each principle presents guidelines, and then each of those guidelines lists success criteria. So now we'll take a look at accessibility through the lens of those 4 principles of WCAG, which are known as the POUR concept: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And there's crossover between these 4 categories, but generally speaking, these areas provide a basic structure for each of the WCAG guidelines. And as we get into the details, I'll remind you, as Noah did, to please enter all questions into the Q&A box. So for our first principle, we'll talk about perceivable. And the first guideline here is to provide text alternatives for non-text content, such as images and charts. And the key word here is content, because we really want to differentiate between informative versus decorative types of graphics. So for those graphics that inform, we want to present alternative text to describe the content that's being presented visually. Next, captions and other alternatives like transcripts should be provided for any multimedia. We want content to also be adaptable, so it should be structured so that it can be presented in different ways, including by assistive technologies, without losing any meaning. And that includes when a user applies their own style sheet, and means that the context and the order, when the order is important, needs to remain intact. And when we're applying responsive design for our different screen sizes and devices, we're adapting our content and apps, and then we're meeting this particular criteria. The content also has to be distinguishable to make it easier for users to see and hear the content. And most of us are probably familiar with not using color as being the only visual means of conveying information, but you might not be as familiar with considerations that are related to, like, autoplay of multimedia, for example. So imagine that you're using a screen reader to read the textual content on the page out loud to you, and then all of a sudden the video automatically starts. So now you can't hear your screen reader. So you're looking around, poking around on the screen, trying to locate the controls to turn off that video, but you find a button and you click it, but that video is still running because there could be more than one video on that page. And so now you've just clicked the control on the wrong video. So it can be a really frustrating circumstance, but unfortunately it happens all too commonly. Another part of being distinguishable is contrast. And you may have already noticed the really low contrast ratio of the graphic at the right of my screen here. It's just a black line drawing on a dark blue background. And that graphic certainly doesn't draw any attention to itself or stand out at all on the page. But I'll tell you, it crossed my mind to improve its contrast by putting a white square behind it so it would stand out a little better. But since this graphic isn't necessary to understand the content of this presentation, then I figured it was a great example of poor contrast as it is, so I purposefully chose to leave it alone. So our second principle is operable. And we want to make all functionality available from a keyboard, avoiding any keyboard traps. So any component that can be accessed by the keyboard can also be moved out of by the keyboard. And a bad example would be like a modal pop-up box that can't be closed regardless of what key that you press. We also want to give our users enough time to read and use our content by avoiding any time limitations unless they're absolutely necessary, like during an online auction, timing may be necessary, and providing the ability for the user to turn off a timer whenever that's possible. It should go without saying, but we don't want to cause our users any negative physical reactions. And we'll do that by making sure that all animation is necessary and minimal. And that includes avoiding any strobing content that could possibly cause seizures, or parallax scrolling, which is when the foreground and background scroll at different rates, because that can affect people that have inner ear disorders and could cause nausea, dizziness, or migraines. We want to help our users navigate and find content using a consistent focus order, as well as ensuring that all headings and labels are descriptive. This includes link labels. I guess I jumped ahead a little too far here. It includes link labels. Each should be descriptive so that users really know where they're headed, or they can find where they're trying to go just by skimming the page. Links that are labeled click here, or if there's multiple read full stories link, those are really common, but they don't meet this guideline. And lastly, we want to consider other input modalities to make it easier to use different input types. So an example would be a mobile app that triggers an undo action when the device is shaken. It should not only provide an on-screen control that could be clicked to undo that last action instead, but it could also provide a method to turn off the motion trigger, because an unsteady user could accidentally undo multiple actions just due to tremors or any other motor impairments. So our third principle is understandable. To make text readable and understandable by the widest audience, considering both reading level and cognitive abilities, and avoiding jargon and acronyms that aren't common to the majority of our audience. We want to make sure that the content appears and operates in predictable ways through consistent navigation, and initiating any content changes only by user request, or by providing the ability to turn off anything that's automated, maybe like a page refresh. And we want to provide input assistance to help users avoid mistakes in the first place, and then to be able to correct them easily when errors are made. So this starts with using really clear field labels and section labels. So as an example, you'd want to make sure that a user can tell the difference between a shipping and a billing address fields. We want to indicate required fields and take advantage of appropriate autofill functionality to reduce keystrokes when possible. We want our error message to be presented in a clearly worded fashion, and to make it easy to remediate those errors, like placing the cursor inside the errored field. And my very favorite is, whenever possible, to prevent the error from occurring in the first place, like automatically converting a date into the expected format rather than requiring the user to enter that date in a specific way. And the fourth principle of WCAG is robust. And here we really want to maximize the capability, the compatibility with both current and future user tools, including adaptive technologies, browsers, and other mediums and devices. Screen markup really comes into play here to indicate relationships between elements that use the same heading level for all main headings, and then a different heading level for each subheading underneath that. Properly identifying emphasized text, and identifying table rows and columns appropriately, so that relationships are clearly tied to each value that those columns and rows share. We want to correlate labels for controls with their related selection or entry fields. And we don't only want to present this logical structure visually, but your development team will also need to apply that appropriate markup within the source code itself, so that a screen reader can present the same logical structure to all of your site visitors. So that's the POUR concept: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Or if it's easier to think about it a different way, I can see it, seeing being in quotes. I can see it, I can do it, I can make sense of it in a variety of different ways. And if any of these four principles aren't true, then users with disabilities won't be able to use the web. But we're not just designing for those people that have disabilities. We're designing for accessibility, which means that we're designing for everyone, even when designing for those that happen to be in a temporary situation, not just for those that are blind or with low vision, but also when there's sun glare, not just for the deaf or hard of hearing, but also in loud environments. Not just to accommodate for tremors, but maybe use on a school bus on a gravel road. Not just for cognitive disabilities, but also for those that may be distracted or rushed. And not just for those with a limb abnormality, but maybe someone with a broken arm, or when they're holding a baby. So providing alternatives for multimedia is a really good example of an accessibility technique that's beneficial for everyone. Both captioning and transcripts provide the ability for media to be consumed in both loud environments like a subway, and in those that must remain quiet, like in a library. Earbuds aren't always handy, and many folks actually prefer transcripts simply because they're faster to read than a video is to watch. And I'm one of those folks. Another example is that at home here, we have our television set for captioning to turn on automatically anytime that it's muted. So if one of us gets a phone call in the middle of the show, then the other one can still keep up with that show while the sound is turned off. So the guidelines presented within the POUR concept allow for the best user experience for all of our visitors, because an accessible product is a usable product. And it starts with design. Now you'll see here in the order that I didn't leave research off. I'm a firm believer that research is a necessary forerunner for every project, so that we're sure that we're designing the right things and we're solving the right problems in the right ways. But it isn't the research that's being developed and tested and implemented, it's the design. So if you don't design for accessibility, then how would we expect to implement an accessible product? Now, speaking of research, if you haven't ever experienced your digital properties through a screen reader before, I'd highly recommend that you do. It'd be really enlightening to experience a site that you're already familiar with through a different medium. And there's a list here of some of the no-cost screen readers that are available. You'll see that they vary by operating system, and often there's one built right in without even having to download anything. And I'll give you an assignment that at your next opportunity to locate the screen reader on the device that you're using right now and just poke around with it. Wander through some of the different apps and sites and tools. And this is a great way to see where your current site or application may have accessibility gaps, or to test the accessibility of a new design before you release it to the public. And if you're looking for additional resources to continue your research into accessibility, the World Wide Web Consortium has a whole lot of information on their site. It can kind of make you feel like you're going round robin if you get out there and poke around. So I wanted to give you a couple of different resources here that may be handy. If you're interested in kind of picking up where this presentation leaves off, then there's a really good summary here on this page. It's got a good overview here at the top, and you'll see that as we scroll down here that there's different categories here that basically similar to this particular presentation, and you can drill into each level here to get additional information. If you're looking to apply accessibility to your sites right now and you're looking for a quick reference, the WCAG 2.1 is the current one that's published right at the moment. And it's put in a format this way that everything's scrolled here on the left. And they're listed also under the POUR concept categories with each guideline. And then there's techniques and failures. You can get a full description here. And then there's additional information for each one that you can drill into. If you're kind of looking to see what the way of the future is right now in draft mode, there's a project for WCAG 3.0 that's more or less using the same content, but providing it in a better format. They tell us that the 3.0 format is more for us to be easier to get started using all of these accessibility guidelines. And I'll point them out to you here. They've already imported a handful of the 2.1 options here, and each one of them is laid out in a very easy way to understand. And then the last thing I'd like to provide you with here are some examples. We don't really have time in this presentation to walk through some examples together, but again, the W3C organization has some fantastic demos here. If you are using one of those free screen readers that we looked at before, there's 5 different examples here, and each one provides both a bad example and a good example of design. For each one, that you can choose to show annotations so that you can walk through each particular item and it'll tell you which part of it is causing the problem. You can access the inaccessible and accessible pages right from here. And there's a report for each one also that is also divided up by our 4 core principle concepts here. And you can drill into each particular guideline to get additional details from here. So that's what we've got for our presentation, and I'd like to turn it over to you for what you've put in the Q&A box to find out what questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Diana. Yeah, and I'll help guide that a little bit. A quick note for those of you who saw the questions, and yeah, take a moment now while I'm giving this note to upload questions and add questions. I'll mention there were two questions regarding kind of the details of the question of the conference, the schedule for it, and if the slides are available. And so answers to that are in the Q&A box under the answer kind of tab thing. I've put those in there. So the most upvoted questions so far. Diana, how do you design? Oh, and if you don't mind, maybe stopping the screen share so people can see us a little bit
Absolutely.
more.
For sure.
Oh,
There you go.
great. So, how do you design for accessibility on virtual reality and augmented reality interfaces?
That's a really good question, and I haven't had the opportunity to do that. So I'd recommend that you get out on Google and try and find some good information on that. That's an excellent question. As well as the IoT technology. There's a lot of interesting
Yeah,
things wrapped around that as well from an accessibility perspective. So that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you. I haven't had the need to design for virtual reality yet, but it'd
it's
be a
all
lot
good.
of fun too.
I always respect when an expert knows their knowledge, but also the limits of their knowledge. I think that's the right thing to do in that context. I feel that. Rupa asks, should we provide alt text for decorative images? Automated tools usually check alt text for all dot images. I think it
Yeah,
just means
that's
all images. Mhm.
sure. That's an excellent question. Typically, a decorative image can just be distracting to someone that's using a screen reader. So it's possible to turn off um, or to set the code to ignore a decorative image. So that's basically the recommendation at that point. It's more the informative images that actually communicate something related to the text that you'll want to put in alt text so that so that someone who can't actually see the graphic can get the good out of that information you're presenting visually.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the next question from Jubin asks, are there any recommended tools for testing accessibility?
Mm, I'm sure there are. I don't represent any of them, so I don't want to
Mhm.
mislead you in that way at all. But again, I'd send you out to Google to try and find them. There are automated testing tools. That's a really good way to get a baseline for how your tool is accessible or not. But I wouldn't limit your testing just to automated testing. I would recommend manually testing as well, not only bringing the screen reader in-house and getting your testers used to using that type of technology when they're doing their either quality assurance or user acceptance testing. But also there's companies that have folks like Outlook Business Solutions where the folks on their ally support program actually do use screen readers day to day, that they're either visually impaired or completely blind. That are excellent. They know the ins and outs of all of those tools and can give you excellent feedback on where it's at now and how you can improve the accessibility of your site or your application.
So, and I see in chat Sarah mentioning that Color Oracle is good for testing color contrast. But of course, color
Excellent.
contrast is just one of the many things we have to attend to. Um, Next up, Rupa asks, oh, something happened to my thing. Just a moment. There we are.
While
Rupa
you're
asks,
doing that, Noah, too,
oh,
I'd
okay,
like to kind of add that another
oh,
real
please.
cheap, easy, kind of down and dirty way to check color contrast also
Mm.
is just to print the page out on a black and white printer and see if you can tell the difference. And if you can't, then the person that's colorblind can't see it either. So that's an excellent cheat technique.
Very smart. Awesome. Next up, Rupa asks, could you please suggest some industry recognized certifications for accessibility?
Hmm. Um, you know, I know that the W3C does not actually certify themselves.
Mm.
They have badges that you can kind of self-certify and put on your page. Um, but that's, it's all self-done. There's also a process that you can go through on your own. That is the VPAT process. It's a voluntary product accessibility template that you can complete. You can Google that too. You can find that template online, and it's all interactive. So each section will drill down into the WCAG guidelines that are associated with that particular criteria to help you fill it out. It's also a self-reporting type of thing. But that template is what you fill out, and then once you get that completed, then it's considered an ACR, or an accessibility conformance report.
Mhm.
So those are a couple of things that you can do on your own. But as far as an organization that actually would come in and certify whether or not your site is accessible or not, I don't actually have a list of those types of organizations, if there are any.
That's great. Next up, this is a bit of a longer one.
Okay.
Maddie asks, and you can follow along with you, by the way, in the Q&A box, guys. So Maddie asks, I have a client who wants to link multiple pages in the website navigation with different labels to the same page. Is this ADA compliant? And she gives more information, and this is the longer
Great.
part. The client wants a gas fireplaces main page with a product catalog in the menu, and under that wants types of events listed. It says direct vent, B vent, vent free, things like that. Types of events.
Okay.
These types of events are not pages on the website, so clients want them all linked to the gas fireplaces page with a filter selected in a catalog for that vent type. ADA compliance issues here?
None that I can think of off the top of my head, as long as each of those links are clearly labeled to where they're going. The concern is more on the other side, when you've got multiple links that are labeled the same way that you can't tell where they're going because they're not descriptive enough. But as long as the links are descriptive, then and they're going to the place where that link is describing, then that should meet the guidelines of the WCAG.
Awesome. This has been great. So we've had a lot of good questions, and there's a few more that still have upvotes. Those are the ones with the most upvotes. How many more do you want to do, Diana? You want to do up to you?
As many as you'd like me to fit in until we've got to
let's keep
switch
going.
over.
All right.
Sure.
So Sarah asks, what about automatic timeouts in something like an online banking application? What's the best way to
Yeah.
handle this from a disability perspective?
Yeah, so those get tricky because that's a security concern, right? So you've got your security folks that are they want to lock things down as tightly as they can, and you've got your usability and accessibility folks that want to open things up as much as they can. So anything that has to do with security, you've got to kind of handle with kid gloves and find a reasonable balance between the two. I've ran into this before on my own site, or the one that I, for my company, since we're a financial services organization. The guideline that fits there the best would be to give the user the ability to reset that particular timer, so that something that tells them that they're running out of time. A countdown would be good in those last few seconds before you're turning them off. Again, giving them enough time. I say a few seconds, but giving them enough time to be able to react to that particular message, and to reset the timer if they are still in fact there and working actively on the tool. Then that gives them the opportunity, gives the user the control, as well as maintaining the security that your security department is probably looking for there.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. Next up. This is a question about your view about accessibility design guidelines for assistive technology for people with dyslexia specifically.
Okay, so there we're looking more at the readability types of things under that third principle of understandable. I point you in that direction to really look through that particular third WCAG principle. There's a lot of good information there. Since we're talking a little bit more about the principles too, there's 3 different levels of conformance with each of the WCAG principles, and some of them are a level A. They're all listed whether they're A, AA, or AAA. The A are the minimum standards. AA is the recommended level that any web content meets, and then AAA is kind of the gold standard of requirements, and it's not recommended for that to try to meet that for an entire site, because they're pretty specific, and there's some content types that just can't meet those AAA guidelines. But when you're working with a specific group like dyslexia, there's underneath the understandable principle, you'll find A, AA, and AAA things there that you can decide how far you want to go into that compliance.
Let's do maybe one more.
Sure.
Gurpreet asks, Gurpreet asks, recently I was checking font colors on most of the big brand sites, and I came to know that that their font will fail on the WCAG AAA score. Is it mandatory to pass the AAA score standard, or this is kind of related to what you were just saying about this, right?
Yeah.
So how important is it to reach the AAA score? What does that mean?
That's a good transition right there, I suppose. AAA isn't recommended across an entire site.
Yeah.
Definitely the AA contrast is what you'd want to shoot for, but the single A is the minimum. So as far as required, there really isn't a requirement, because there's there's not a more, everything's more self-certifying, right? So unless you're working with a government agency that's requiring your sites and products to be accessible, there's the requirement is yours. Meet three where you can, the AAA, and strive. I'd recommend to strive for AA across the board.
Nice. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you very much.
And please give Diana a big thank you. We can't hear you applaud, so please give her a big thank you in the chat box.